This is the Meetinghouse with Dwight A. Moody. News, reviews, commentary, and conversation on religion and American life. Now, here is Dr. Moody.
Hello, everybody, and Happy New Year to all of you from wherever you are watching or listening today on this, the last broadcast of our year 2021. I'm coming to you today from the Meetinghouse, from our studios in Hendersonville, North Carolina, eager to bring you a conversation on religion and American life. My guest today, Mark Wingfield, certainly knows a lot about religion and American life, a distinguished journalist, producer and executive editor of Baptist News Global, a longtime friend of mine, a person I highly respect, whose essays and commentary I read every week. I encourage you to do the same. We're going to feature on the show this week with Mark, just like we did on the last show of last year, a look back at the year 2021, all the interesting and stunning things that have happened in this year related to religion and American life. I'm sure you'll have some ideas, and I wish we had a call-in feature on our show. We'd be glad to talk to all of you about what's going on and what you experienced. Already I've gotten, in response to my newsletter last night, interesting commentary, pushback, comments about it, especially about what I plan to do in the coming year. I'm going to talk about that in just a few minutes. I'm going to start today, as I always do, with the news. I've got 5 news stories today, all of it brought to you by Perfecto Coffee of California. PerfectoCoffeeInc.com is a place where you can order your coffee. It's where I order my coffee, and I'm going to send to my guest today, Mark Wingfield out in Dallas, Texas, a package of their coffee as a small token of my gratitude for him coming on the show today. We're going to start in New York City today. The National Council of Churches has released in digital form its most recent revision of the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. An eclectic group of Jewish, Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox scholars have been working for 4 years to update the language in the translation most widely used in scholarly circles. I've got 2 copies of that book on my shelf behind me. To give you an example of how the language is changing, in the old version, words like demoniacs, epileptics, and paralytics were used. They're being replaced with phrases like people possessed by demons, people having epilepsy, or people afflicted with paralysis, reflecting, generally speaking, the way we talk about afflictions and diseases today. The Revised Standard Version is 70 years old. Its chief revision, the New Revised Standard Version, is 33 years old. And this new edition, to be known as RSVUE, will be available in print coming this spring. From Boulder, Colorado, there are 2 sides of this story. First, a company called Glue, I think that's the way you pronounce it, launched in 1915, is offering religious groups a new tool for church growth and ministry. It is the information that Glue collects by mining personal and financial data on people, just like corporations do. They say it helps groups identify potential members and donors. It's big tech coming to church, and it has drawn the attention of large organizations like the Barna Research Group and scores of megachurches. The other side to this story is this cutting-edge technology ministry strategy has drawn the attention of the Wall Street Journal, which published an article this week in its tech section. If you're interested, you can go to their website, www.gloo.us. Sign up your church. From Cape Town, South Africa, Anglican Archbishop Desmond Tutu died at the age of 90. Born into segregated society of South Africa, Tutu grew up to become a world-renowned leader in the struggle for freedom, opportunity, and human rights, not just in South Africa, but throughout the world. He helped lead the campaign to end segregation, what they called apartheid in South Africa. Later, he challenged the injustice and corruption of the post-colonial government of his native country. He led the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for his country. He won the Nobel Prize for Peace in 1984, traveling often to the United States to speak and lecture. In 2009, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. From Hollywood, California, 3 movies with religious themes or overtones were released during the Christmas season. American Underdog tells the remarkable story of Super Bowl winning quarterback Kurt Warner. The film is designed for the religious masses, even if it suppresses the real-life Christian faith of its hero. The Matrix Resurrections continues the story launched in 1999 of the messianic mission of tech whiz Thomas Anderson and his female sidekick, Trinity. Both of them seek to escape a world of illusion to live real and free. The movie Sing 2 is a sequel to the popular 2016 animated musical comedy, picking up the themes of talent and ambition, confidence and doubt, privilege and popularity, without explicit religious references. The various animals are voiced by who's who of stardom, including well-known and Christian celebrity Bono, whose original composition, Your Song Saved My Life, was written for the show. And then everywhere, including today in the Meetinghouse. Many religious news services are doing year-end summaries of the 2021 news in religion. On the list of many of them are these common themes that we're going to be talking about today. The influx of Muslim refugees from Afghanistan, the legal tussle over public health protocols and religious freedom, the ongoing internal struggles of the largest religious networks in the United States, including Roman Catholic, Southern Baptist, and United Methodist, the impact of the COVID pandemic on church attendance and funding, Christian ministries and clerical stress and resignation, public policy issues such as abortion and race, and the role of religion in the January 6th insurrection, which is where I want to start in just a few minutes when I come back and talk to my guest, Mark Wingfield. That's all the news brought to you by Perfecto Coffee Inc. of California. I'll be back in just a minute. You're in the Meetinghouse today, where we have conversation on religion and American life. I'm your host, Dwight A. Moody. My guest is Mark Wingfield, coming back to the Meetinghouse. He was here just 1 year ago this week. He's the executive editor and producer of Baptist News Global, a first-rate news organization with both a wide-angle lens on all that is happening, coupled with a unique focus on our own tradition, that is the rowdy people known as Baptists. Welcome back to the Meetinghouse, Mark.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
Well, it's been an interesting year in our profession. You, a career-long journalist, and me just recently to it. I want to talk to you about first the list that everybody is making. Do you in Baptist News Global, have you created these kind of year-end lists?
Everyone loves a good year-end list. That's our stock in trade, it seems. So we've produced 4 lists this week. 3 of them are most read lists, the top 15 most read news articles, top 15 most read opinion pieces, the top 10 most read analysis pieces, and then we had a bonus one that my director of operations wrote, just highlighting her 5 favorite pieces of the year. These are a few of my favorite things was the title of that. So we look at it not from necessarily what was the most important story, but we look at it from what was the most read, which might be the same, but it might not be.
Might not. Well, let's take a couple of those most read pieces. What were they about?
So on the news side, the most read piece we had this year by far was a piece I wrote about people trying to get religious exemptions to COVID vaccine mandates. And not only that, I wrote 2 or 3 or 4 pieces on this as it developed, and all of them ended up being, big performers. And if you took the aggregate of those, they would far and away be our biggest news story of the year. People searching the internet for information on how to get a religious exemption to the COVID vaccine mandates. And our articles probably didn't help them, because most of what they said was, you can't rightly do this because there's no religious body in America that believes this is valid.
That's right. And there have been some religious exemptions, but I think the Supreme Court turned down the medical workers in New York City and New York State
That's
just
correct.
a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
This has been a fascinating thing. I wrote my newsletter last night, and then I posted this morning on Facebook about what we were going to talk about. And I want to read you one of the comments that was posted on my Facebook page this morning, because it had to do with this very issue. I don't think this person had read your articles. This was a one-time professor at Georgetown College. She's now teaching in public high schools. Most important to me of the religious issues of 2021 was the fact that many Christians, including ministers, railed against vaccines and masks and restrictions and failed to show compassion for others. Instead, they called the vaccinated people sheeple. That's a new word to me, sheeple.
People,
and a mashup of people and sheep, and screamed, quote, faith over fear, end quote, while their own people perished. Though still a follower of Christ, I have not wanted to associate with the institution of church and find myself deeply disappointed. I am not alone. It's amazing.
Yeah, so here's what we know about the vaccine resistance in the church. This is a minority of Americans. It is a minority of religious Americans. It's a minority even of evangelicals,
Yes.
But it is a substantial majority among the evangelical community, and it is a very loud minority as well. And so this is one of those things where the amount of heat being generated is disproportionate to the amount of fire that's there, but we still have to pay attention to it, because this is part of what's keeping us from the kind of herd immunity that everyone who actually knows something about this says that we've needed. And it is mind-boggling and staggering, and we have to wonder if the political situation of the past 5 years had not been what it is, would these mainly evangelicals be all tied up in a knot about this? Or is this really the next evolution of the existing anti-vax movement that we've been contending with anyway?
No, I think it's 100% political, Mark. You'll have to convince me otherwise. Everybody I know in the little church where I preach now, in my family, in my wife's family, I've got friends who talk to me about it. Everybody who has refused to get vaccinated, whether they have requested an exemption or not, comes out of this political environment associated with Donald Trump. I have no exceptions to that general observation. There may be some.
And yet he's vaccinated and boosted.
Yes, and most of the leaders of his movement are vaccinated. It is a strange thing.
Yeah.
I
So
want to.
a little historical note. So during my tenure as associate pastor at Wilshire Baptist Church here in Dallas, during those 17 years, you may recall that we were at the center of the U.S. Ebola problem when it
Yes.
erupted several
Yes.
years ago, because Thomas Eric Duncan was the man from Liberia who came to the United States, to Dallas, infected with Ebola unwittingly. And, everything, it just huge scare. He
I
was
remember this.
engaged to a member of our church. And so we were like at the front of this for months. And what's fascinating to me is the people who were most afraid at that time of Ebola, which had a very small chance of it. I mean, Thomas Eric Duncan had never even stepped foot in our church, but we had people who wouldn't even come to church because they were afraid like the pews were contaminated or something.
Yeah.
But those are the same people who won't get vaccinated today against COVID.
Yeah. It is. It's part of a larger, I think, anti-government movement. I want us to talk about it a little bit later in the show when we get on the subject of the insurrection, which is just the anniversary of which is just 1 week away. But I do want to chase a rabbit here. You mentioned Wilshire Baptist Church there in Dallas, and I got a post this morning from Sandy Hallman. You know Sandy. And she commented about her mother-in-law, Peaches, whom you knew.
Right.
And of course, Peaches, I said Sandy, but that wasn't right. Sandy and Peaches were married and were members of my church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Oh, right. I forgot that. Yeah.
Yes. And so they were dear friends of mine. And I'd lost contact with them for many years until they got down there to Dallas in Wilshire. I wanted to chase that rabbit because you mentioned your church.
Right.
So if that was the number one,
was great too.
Number one article, the most read article by a long shot, you said.
Yes.
What was first in another category?
So here's the fascinating thing. When you look at opinion, so we do a lot of opinion pieces that do very, very well, written by a variety of writers, including people like you.
Right.
The top opinion piece for this year was actually published last year, and it ties to one of your stories at the start of the show. It's written by a guy named Ed Oxford, and the title is "My Quest to Find the Word Homosexual in the Bible," and it has to do with the 1940s translation of the RSV originally, and how in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, the word homosexual appeared in English for the first time. And Ed and his partner, his writing partner, Kathy Baldock, have written a book about this that I believe will come out this year. There's a documentary coming out as well that has to do with the error. It is a translation error that happened that the translators later admitted was an error. But it got copied and duplicated and everywhere. And that word in Greek does not translate to homosexual.
Makes me wonder whether it got cut out in this new version.
I'm very curious about that. By the time the RSV, I think the NRSV does not have it. I'd have to go back and look. It's been a while since I looked at this. But the problem when the RSV first came out is a lot of other translations built on it, because that was right at the forefront of all this huge explosion of English translations of the Bible.
Right.
Everything from the paraphrase of the Living Bible to the NIV.
The Good News Bible.
Yeah, all of these things took that as their cue, and it's just an error that got duplicated and duplicated.
Well, I'll be anxious to follow up on that story. I'm very interested in this whole subject. The congregation that I pastor is an open and affirming congregation, and I suspect Wilshire is also.
Yes.
And I'm glad of it.
Matter of fact.
Say what?
I've written a book about that.
Well, tell us the name of it. Promote it. Yeah, you've got
Yeah.
a
Why churches need to talk about sexuality. It's about Wilshire's journey, 18-month journey studying LGBTQ inclusion and what it did to the church and how we came through it and how you can learn from that.
yeah. Well, all the churches need to go through this. They all need to read your book and talk about it.
Well,
I
that's
never
the point of the
led
book
a congregation a conversation on this, but I had a conversation with myself over many years on it.
right. Most churches avoid the conversation, and that's not fair. It's all, I almost don't care where you come out as long as you have a thoughtful process and have actually talked about it. That way people can know where you stand.
So the most read article was about religious exemptions.
Yes.
Another most read article was lingering from the year before. I think that's a very wonderful testimony to the power of putting things on the web about inclusion, LGBTQ inclusion. What other stories were at the top of your list?
So our number 2 story in the opinion category is also going to hit one of your big themes for the year. And this was, we ran an excerpt of Beth Allison Barr's new book on the making of biblical womanhood.
Yeah.
And the title of this piece for us was, I knew the truth about women in the Bible and I stayed silent. Yeah.
Yes, I read the article when it came out.
Yeah. So Beth Allison Barr is a professor at Baylor University.
Mm-hmm.
Her husband is a Baptist pastor. She's a historian,
Mm-hmm.
And she has written this excellent book. It's really an excellent book about how this whole notion of male headship has been twisted, particularly by evangelicals and a lot by Southern Baptists. And man, she lit a fire under the male headship people, particularly the Council on Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, and the young Theo Bros, and they have just been unable to stop attacking her for the past 6 months.
I'm going to have to get her in the Meetinghouse for a conversation on this book. I have followed all of this story. It's not unrelated to the Beth Moore story that also came out of Texas.
Yeah, that's right. So if I had to piece together one of the themes of all these most read stories of the year and the most important stories of the year, there are different facets of the struggle for white male headship to be continued, whether it's attacking Beth Allison Barr, whether it's attacking our number one story. Another top story for us was this Texas pastor. Why does all this come out of Texas? Baptist pastor who called Kamala Harris a Jezebel.
Yes.
2 days after the inauguration. And then another pastor piled on and did the same thing. And these are leaders in this most conservative wing of the Southern Baptist Convention. And so all of these connections in different ways, that really there's an epic struggle going on right now against modernity and inclusion, all as it relates to LGBTQ, but also on the very basic issue of women's worth and role in the church and home.
Yes, I actually wrote an article in the Meetinghouse about the Jezebel. I called it the Jezebel of Third Baptist Church. She's a member of Third Baptist Church out in San Francisco.
Right.
And it is part of a wider repudiation of it's just a continuation of this modernist fundamentalist tension that's been going on actually for 100 years now. Started about 1920, this pushback against modernity that has really characterized all of my ministerial life and all of your ministerial life in the environment in which we've worked.
But Dwight, I think it's gotten more strident in many ways, and it's been made more strident by the rise of Calvinism again. And you and I've watched this play out over the last 25 years, in particular, uh, and even within the Southern Baptist Convention, there's this strain of really strident neo-Calvinism that is full of mainly men, uh, mainly white men,
Yes.
who are absolutely convinced they know God's absolute truth,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
only they know God's absolute truth.
Yes.
And you are either on board with it or you are not.
Well, I have also reported in that vein about the difficulties that Bethlehem Baptist Church in the St. Paul, Minneapolis area, where John Piper was pastor for so long,
Yes.
and the McLean Bible Church in DC, both of them big time centers of this white male Calvinism. The troubles that have overwhelmed both of those churches just within the last year or two. They're not the only churches to experience the trauma related to this, but because of the influence of those, and especially the John Piper Church up in Minnesota, what's gone on there. And are you aware of John Piper's son and what has happened
Yes.
with him? He's become a TikTok kind of viral hero out there with these videos, really ridiculing a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, so here's an interesting observation. In
Okay.
this world of evangelical Calvinists, which used to be an oxymoron, but anyhow, in this world, there are really 3 or 4 or 5 big church leaders, and John Piper's been one of them. Mark Dever is another, and John MacArthur, of course, is sort of leader of the pack.
Right.
But most of the other foot soldiers in the movement today are unknown pastors of smaller churches all across the United States,
right,
who seem to have a whole lot of time to live on Twitter because they're who I call the Theo Bros. They are patrolling everyone on Twitter, and I mean it is vicious. It's mean. That they are some of the meanest people I've ever met on social media.
Yes, it's really ungodly and unfortunate and sad in many, many ways, given all the other real issues that are pressing on us from every side.
And remember that the SBC folks in this crowd lost their mind when Rick Warren and Saddleback Church ordained 3 women as ministers.
Yeah.
Saddleback being the largest church in the Southern Baptist Convention and nothing near a liberal church.
That's right. And he certainly, if you could tag the most influential Baptist pastor probably in the world is Rick Warren, and the most influential Southern Baptist woman was Beth Moore.
Right.
Both of these men, objects of the ire of these right-wing fundamentalist Calvinist people that are trying to hold on to something that they feel, I guess, slipping away. I do want to move from that to the Religion News Writers Association. I want to assume for a minute that you're a member of that group.
No, because of our status, we don't actually qualify. But yeah.
Well, they put out their list. I saw on their website this morning the list of their officers. Their most recent president was Peter Smith. Do you know Peter Smith?
Oh, I know Peter. Yeah.
Yeah. He's up at Pittsburgh. He was in Louisville for a long time. A wonderful and a personal friend of yours and mine too. Yes. They put out their list, and the number one story on their list was the religious dimension of the January 6th insurrection. And I want us to talk about this because next Thursday, okay, let's just read through this list and we'll come back and talk about it. The Taliban and Afghanistan, and I want to add the refugee flood of Muslim refugees into America. I did a show on that about a month ago. The Supreme Court and abortion, religious exemptions during COVID. We've already talked about that. Joe Biden as our second Catholic president. Christian affiliation membership has fallen to 47%, as we've both reported.
Right.
The impact of the pandemic on worship and on money. I think the interesting thing there, the worship has fallen dramatically, but the money has not.
Correct.
Isn't that interesting? We could then in Canada, the graves of all these of the indigenous children at these schools. Beth Moore splits from the SBC, and the SBC fighting off a pull to the right. I was at the Southern Baptist Convention this year and witnessed a great deal of that. But I want to go back to the top of the list and talk about the insurrection. What about this insurrection and the religious dimension of it?
So I think this is part and parcel of everything we're talking about, and this is very well expressed in an analysis piece we published yesterday by a wonderful pastor scholar named Rodney Kennedy, and his point, well documented, is that modern evangelicals, and by the way, when we talk about modern evangelicals, I know some people get offended because they say, well, I'm an evangelical, but I'm not that kind of evangelical.
Right.
The problem is the term has been co-opted by this religio-political identity, and it's just been hijacked, and there is no other shorthand. So anyhow, that's who we're talking about. Rodney's piece is about how they are essentially recreating the medieval crusades. They are crusaders intent on controlling church and state. And he makes a great case for what this is about. That's part of what we saw happening on January 6th. And it ought, yesterday on NPR, I heard one of the Capitol police officers interviewed, and it's just mind-boggling that 11 and a half months later, the right has redefined this event in such a way that they've convinced so many people it really wasn't that bad after all.
Right.
And the police officer said, I was there, it was bad.
Yeah. Well, of course, Republican politicians have, have their own agenda on this to try to minimize the political damage. I'm going to have to go back and read that article, Mark, that you just referred to, because I wrote my article last night announcing in print what I announced on this show last week, that I am deviating beginning next week. My shows, my broadcasts deal with a different topic every week. From book authors to current events to long-term trends. But I've decided that I'm going to give for 3, 4, 5 months my attention almost solely to what I call, to use a word that you just used, the Christian crusade to take over America. And because I think that this is, like your writer said, evidently, it is, I think, the most significant and consequential religious movement in America today. Is that the militarization, turning this passion, this culture war into a real war.
Yes.
When Jerry Falwell and those guys coined that phrase back when you and I were just starting our ministry and starting to write about all this, it was a metaphorical use of the word. But January 6th last year taught us and showed us that it's not just metaphorical. And I think there could be a lot more insurrection type events ahead. And I'm going to devote my time to it.
Well, I think we have to pay attention to what the generals, the military generals said last week or week before, that's also been in the news, this warning that some of them have issued
Yes.
The insurrection of January 6th could happen again
Yes.
in
Yes.
2024, and we need to be prepared for that. And part of what's fueling that is the wedding of evangelical ideology with love for the military, so that I'm going to use this word. A lot of these cultural warriors are now embedded in the military and in some other government posts, because this is the strategy that's been employed.
You know, their strategy is to take over everywhere that they can. We've seen this year this strategy applied to school boards.
Right.
And we are seeing it applied to election commissions in states all over the country and to state legislatures. So everywhere there is an election where people of this ilk who have this crusade mentality to win the culture war, to save America. I quoted last week one of the U.S. congresswomen from Colorado who said to a group of people, and I'm going to paraphrase this, I don't have the quote right in front of me, "I'm tired of ungodly people running the country. It's time for you and me to take it over." This was her language. She is a U.S. congresswoman from the state of Colorado, and she just articulated what you were trying to do, what you described a minute ago.
Absolutely. No, that's it. That's it. And, you know, the school board thing is real. I live in North Dallas.
Yes.
We're part of Richardson Independent School District, which is
yes,
one of the top-rated school districts in the state of Texas. Our superintendent was voted superintendent of the year last year, and a few weeks ago she quit. She up and quit.
No, I remember.
Yeah, because she was so hounded by these anti-mask, anti-critical race theory, anti-diversity people who are mainly originating from one megachurch in our community, that they drove her off. And we thought this could never happen in our school district, and it did.
Yes, I reported last week in the Meetinghouse on the chairman of the board in a large school district in Harris County, Texas, which is Houston.
Yes.
He is the pastor of a Black Baptist church.
Right.
Been on the school board for 17 years. And he was voted out. Same dynamics, same issue. I don't know what church or churches that movement was coming from in the Houston area, but it's happening all over. Of course, I'm a Georgia resident and Georgia voter. It's happening down there at all levels.
It is.
And in Florida.
The important thing to know is it's a nationally coordinated effort.
It is.
That appears to be grassroots, but it really isn't.
It's not.
There are some think tanks. The Heritage Foundation is one of the people, Turning Point USA, several organizations like that they are giving people a handbook on how to do this, and they're following the playbook. That's what happened in Harris County, Texas, the case you're talking about. They were inspired by the Heritage Foundation and took their manual, they have a booklet, and just worked it point by point.
They're doing that in the same way they have provided that kind of step-by-step guidance to state legislatures about how to handle lots of things. So it is professional. It is nationally funded from some really big, deep pocket donors who are funding this all over the country. And it's kind of mashed up with the militia movement, with the anti-tax movement, the anti-government movement, the private school movement. All of these things, in my judgment, covered with a veneer of religion, with a lot of religious rhetoric, constitute what some people who look at it politically say this is the serious attack on democracy. You and I look at it significantly religiously, and we see it, to use your word and my word, a crusade, a religiously fueled movement to replace things that are happening in the country with what they think used to be. So I'm starting next week on Thursday, January the 6th, to deal with this in a consistent. I've reported on it all year. I'll tell you another part of it, Mark, and this is the Pentecostal prophecy movement.
Yes.
A good bit of this rhetoric and religious inspiration is coming, yes, out of the white evangelical, but more specifically out of the Pentecostal movement, the Charisma magazine down here in Orlando, Florida, and their tours around the country. I'll tell you this one story. I reported on their Restore America tour, and their speakers were up in either Michigan, Wisconsin, or Minneapolis, and they were telling people not to get a vaccine.
Mm.
I reported on it. And because I reported on it, Facebook contacted us saying that we had violated their policies. They were thinking that we were advocating something we were just reporting. They shut down the show, took it off of Facebook. A kind of cancel culture that made me nervous, I'll have to say.
Right. Yeah. I'm not one of the conspiracy theorists about social media being the root of all evil, but I will acknowledge that social media folks have a very hard time discerning lies from people who report on lies.
Yes, that's exactly what happened to us.
Right.
And we're a very small player in all of this, but let's move on from this to Afghanistan and the Taliban and this influx of Muslim refugees. I reported on it about a month ago, interviewing a woman who was organizing things in Oklahoma.
Yes.
And of course, we here in North Carolina also are receiving. There are 38 states who have agreed to receive these immigrants, these refugees. 12 have said no, interestingly enough. Mm. What's the status down there in Texas?
Oh, we're very much receiving them. In fact, I serve on the board of a refugee ministry here in Dallas, and we're actively involved in that because Dallas and Houston are two major destinations for a refugee resettlement in general, but also particularly for Middle Eastern refugees. So we're in the thick of it here. And what's fascinating about this is because of the military love that the conservative evangelicals have, even though they've been turned anti-immigrant by Donald Trump and company and Stephen Miller, this case is one of supporting our military, and therefore it's okay.
It's okay.
Right? So that's like a blessing in disguise because it's helping immigrants, which the Bible commands us to do. They're just getting at it the wrong way. If only that could then apply to other folks seeking refuge. It truly is a racist motivation, though, because if the same people were Mexican or Guatemalan, they would be against it.
And this is the irony of it, that all the Hispanics, Mexicans and Guatemalans and Hondurans who are coming, Brazilians who are coming over the border, the vast majority of them are already Christian.
Right.
Many of them Pentecostal.
Or Catholic.
Or most of them Catholic.
Yeah.
And they're putting up barriers to keep out the Christians coming from the Latino countries. And they're opening their arms to the Muslim refugees from the Middle East that they've been trying to keep out for so long. It is just such a twisted, upside down thing, don't you think?
It is. It just like so many of these things, it makes no sense.
It makes no sense. It makes no sense.
Like we're looking at science fiction.
Yeah, I did a part of my show about a month ago on this. I quoted the head of the Republican Party in Oklahoma, who put out a statement before all the refugees got here, saying, "Let's not let a single one of these Afghan refugees in our state. None of them in our churches. None of them in our homes. None of them in our cities." It was as blatant a repudiation of these immigrants as I've seen in a long time. It's the only statement I've really heard against it, but there are 12 states that have voted not to do it. I guess this is coming from their governors.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that, but that guy in Oklahoma is fringe.
Yeah. Well, we hope he's fringe. we, we hope he's fringe. We hope all of these crazy people are fringe. But
Yeah, well, that's what we used to think.
that's what this
Dwight,
is my point.
Yeah, this is. I keep thinking about, and it, my father had an older sister who lived far from us when I was growing up, but I didn't really know her or her family. But my father would talk to her on the phone occasionally, and she suffered from paranoid schizophrenia diagnosis. And my father, I mean, she was just he would talk to her on the phone, and she was always tied into the latest conspiracy and all these things, right? That was truly a mental health diagnosis. All right.
Yes.
And I remember as a child thinking, okay, this is odd, but this is a mental health problem. I learned to understand that, right? But the problem today is we have millions of people who are not diagnosed with mental health issues who are believing crazier things than that.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't know what to do with that.
Yes. You don't know this, Mark, but I have a son who's mentally ill, who has schizophrenia. I deal every day, every single day, with this reality of somebody that is sweet and kind, generous, and very dear to me, who lives in both worlds. And I'm very familiar with the dynamics you're talking about, and how this situation of believing the great lie and all of its ramifications is so much worse. It has no known point of origin.
Right.
We don't know how to treat it. There's no known treatments for it. And it is a sad thing for our whole country, what we're having to deal with.
Yes. That's very well said.
Well, we've looked for 40 minutes at this last year. Let's look ahead a little bit. What do you see coming down the pike?
Well, number one, the pandemic is still with us. And despite what we might hope, it's still shaping everything. And we're in this other round of events getting canceled, conferences getting canceled, travel getting canceled. And how that's going to play out, we just don't know. It is the to quote Donald Rumsfeld, it's the known unknown. We realize this is a factor, and it's a wild card that's going to influence another year as we go through. Second, as we head toward the midterm elections, there's going to be a lot more of this, everything we've just talked about. And if the Theo Republicans end up taking back either the House or the Senate or both,
I expect him to do both.
Then that changes the dynamic again, and it's just all the more conflict that's going to happen. And the problem with that is I'm all in favor of a two-party system with reasonable people in both parties. But what we have now is one party that has been taken over by insanity and lies and blatant disregard for reality. And that is exceedingly dangerous to everyone, especially given the tilt of the Supreme Court that continues to lean into that because of the political appointments that have been made there. And I think we've got to keep our eyes on that, not just on the abortion issue, which is big, but there are other religious liberty issues that the Supreme Court continues to deal with that are going to have far-reaching ramifications as well. And more, they are leaning toward this new revised definition of religious liberty that's all about free exercise and not about no establishment.
Yes.
Right?
The case out of Maine, which was argued
Yes.
just last week about taxation, tax dollars going to religious schools, is a piece of what you're talking about. The part of the Supreme Court that troubles me the most, if I can again paraphrase Brett Kavanaugh, when he was listening to the abortion case, his question was, well, why should we get involved anyway? Why can't we just stay neutral on this issue? And it gave me the sense that the court may not defend the advances in civil liberties, in the separation of church and state, in the rights of individuals, including women who are carrying babies, including gay and lesbian people who want to marry. All these things that have happened in our lifetime that have so angered the conservative religious culture that undergirds this Christian crusade. I just wonder if the court is just going to step aside and to answer Brett Kavanaugh's rhetorical question with the answer, no, I don't think we're going to get involved on this.
Well, so Dwight, I think you put your finger on another possible trend.
Yes.
There's the trend of the Crusaders.
Yes.
But there's also the trend of those who had the ability to shape this or to stop it, who are just pulling back and saying, I mean, it's the Pilate thing.
Yes.
I'm going to wash my hands.
I'm going to wash my hands of it.
Yeah. What is truth?
Yeah. Wow.
And this is equally dangerous.
Wow. You're going to make me start preaching here, Mark. That's a great text that we need right now in America. What is truth? I'm going to wash my hands of it. You see it happening in the Republican Party with their leaders, Mitch McConnell and Mitt Romney, who know better, but who don't speak up. Mitt has to some extent, more than Mitch.
Right.
Both of them very religious people. I do think that is going to be that's going to be a trend. Now, the question I want to ask you as an observer of religion in America, Mark, we wring our hands over this white Christian nationalism, this white Christian America. To quote the title of the book, Robert Jones' book last year, is there a version of Christianity that is true enough, strong enough, courageous enough to redirect the Christian community in America to a more hopeful future?
Fantastic question. And I have a two-part answer.
Okay.
Yes, there exists such a group, and we are the majority of Christians in America.
Yes, I agree with that.
However, we are not have not been as highly motivated to be active. We have been passive. We are by nature passive.
Right.
We are by nature not as activist as the far right. And this is where the loudest voices continue to prevail. I want to bring this all the way back around to the beginning of your show where you talk about the death of Desmond Tutu. What we saw in South Africa, was the rotten fruit of minority rule.
Yes.
And what is happening in America today is a campaign for minority rule by a certain branch of evangelical
I
Christianity.
agree 100% with your analysis. I agree with everything that you've said. And of course, the part of it is that these crusaders have been shaped and mobilized over 3 generations,
Yes.
beginning back in the late 60s and early 70s. And it's taken them that long to build up the rhetoric, the rationale, the spirit, the connections, the institutions, the funding, all of it to undergird this crusade that you and I both see happening.
Right.
Wow. Well, it's going to be an interesting year. And the fact of the pandemic and the politics, the two things you mentioned first, are both are going to shape this year ahead, plus things we can't even think of. We can't imagine the things that will happen in the year coming.
Indeed.
Mark, thank you for talking to me today in the Meeting House.
A
Let's
pleasure.
do this again next December and
Yeah.
look back on 2022. I hope we're still strong in writing and thinking and speaking to these issues. You do a terrific job, Mark. I read your stuff all the time. I can't think of
Thanks,
a better
Dwight.
writer to analyze things that are dear to so many people. Keep up the good work. Somebody,
All right. Great to be with
yes,
you. Thanks.
you've got 2 more days to receive donations. Somebody send some
That's
money to
right.
Mark Wingfield.
Keep those cards and letters coming. Yeah.
I'll be back in just a minute to wrap up the show. You are in the Meeting House, the last few minutes of our Meeting House broadcast this week. I'm Dwight Moody, the creator and host of the Meeting House. I want to say that next week is January the 6th. Next Thursday, the day of our broadcast, is January the 6th. A lot of attention throughout the country will be upon the insurrection at the Capitol of last year. I'm going to use that as a jumping off point for launching a weeks-long, months-long focus on what I call the Christian crusade to take over America. About 3 years ago, I wrote an article called The Coming Christian Tsunami. And I do think there's an enormous amount of energy that's being mobilized by a minority of Christians, certainly a minority of citizens, to effect these ends. I'm going to be talking about that next week. I wrote about it in my column this week. One woman wrote me back, and I want to read what she wrote. I've enjoyed your newsletter, but I'm bone weary of hearing about the white evangelicals who gave us Donald Trump and prolonged our suffering with vaccine refusal. They are morally bankrupt. Could not you report instead on what progressive Christians are doing to promote human dignity and equality and care for our dying planet? Please tell us a more enlightened Christian theology and ethic, end quote. Well, I'm going to be talking about that. I'm going to try to answer that question in the coming weeks as well. Thank you for listening and watching today. Happy New Year to all of you. Go to our website at themeetinghouse.net. You can subscribe to my weekly newsletter, and you can write me back if you don't like what you read in that newsletter. You can read all the commentaries and reviews on the website. This broadcast will be a podcast, and we'll have it up within 24 hours. You can send some of that money over to Baptist News Global and support Mark and his work, and you can send us a check too. Go to themeetinghouse.net/support. Thanks to my engineer, Everett Armstrong in Brunswick, Georgia, Alex Mattingly in Louisville, Kentucky, to my guest, Mark Wingfield. Always great talking to you, Mark. This week, do some justice, love some mercy, walk with God, be kind to everyone, pray for the soul of America. I'm Dwight Moody in the Meeting House. Have a great day.
You have been in the Meeting House with host Dwight A. Moody. Thank you for watching or listening today. Visit our website at themeetinghouse.net for more news, reviews, commentaries, and conversation on religion and American life.